Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we start today on Sutra number 39. In the earlier sutra, we have seen, beginning with Sutra 35, I think. Yes, beginning with 35, Narada gives us the essential spiritual practices for a devotee. We saw that he says we have to renounce all objects and an attachment to those objects which take us away from our spiritual ideal. A second practice he recommends is a continuous practice of worship. And we saw by worship is meant not simply ritualistic worship, but finding a way to transform all our work, all the duties and responsibilities that we have throughout the day, throughout our life, somehow connecting it to our spiritual ideal. Finding a place for God in all of our relationships and in all of our work. That is the way to transform even what seems externally as the secular work into an internal spiritual worship. And in Sutra 37, he said that even finding opportunities to listen or think of God or listen to God's glories, even in the apparently ordinary activities of day-to-day life. And then in Sutra 38, he says, primarily, however, what we need in the path of love is the grace of God and the grace of great ones. Now, it is that theme then which he will now develop in the succeeding sutras. So let's read the Sutra 39 together. Mahat Sangastu Durlabhaha Agamyaha Amoghascha. The company of holy persons is difficult to attain as well as understand and never fails to produce the result. So Mahat Sangastu, Mahat means company of the holy. Sangaha means company. Durlabhaha, Durlabha means is difficult to attain. And that is one of the challenges people have had, not only in the times in which we live, but at pretty much all times. It's not always easy to find holy company. And the difficulty is, it's not always easy to judge who is holy and who is not holy, because appearances can be deceptive. And so one might say, yes, I want the company of the holy, but where do I find a holy person? We might find good people among our acquaintances, but there is something, well, a good company is better than a bad company. But what does a company of the holy mean? At some point, at what point does goodness change to holiness? What is the relationship between being good and being holy? Is there any difference between the two? And I would say that all those who are holy are good, but all those who are good need not be holy. Now, by that I mean, holiness does involve a place for spirit or God. So there are people who may not see themselves as religious, may not care for God, may see themselves as atheists or agnostics. The mistake we should not make is to think that just because someone doesn't believe in God or someone doesn't believe in religion, then that person is bad. I think that would be wrong. It's possible to be a non-believer and yet be good. It's possible to be non-believer and yet be a moral person. So being non-religious is not by that measure alone to be considered immoral. If we reduce religion to simply just being good, then there is really no difference between religion and morality. But what I'm suggesting is that religion is more than simply being moral. So, to be moral is to do what is right, to do what is good, and avoid what is evil. But to be spiritual or to be religious or to acquire holiness, I must look deeper into this goodness and evil, or where do they arise? Why should I be good? And I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. We all recognize the importance of being good, importance of being truthful. But what we need to ask is, why should I be good? Why should I be truthful? If, as an answer to that question, or why should I be good, I find a reason which is beyond this material world, the reason in which somehow God or spiritual ideal finds a place, it is then that goodness changing into holiness, that possibility opens up. As Holy Mother Sharda Devi used to say, that what happens when a person realizes God? Does the person grow a pair of horns? In other words, there isn't any external manifestation which is very visible and obvious in order for us to know whether someone is holy or not. The only way we can know or judge a person's holiness is by getting to know them better. So if just a 5-minute meeting with someone may not always be possible for us to judge the inner life of that person. In fact, well, what to speak of 5 minutes, even 5 days may not be enough. So we just have to use our best judgment, not rush at judging anyone. We can take our time and use our best judgment in life. Just as in everything in life, we make judgments about, well, this is the right thing for me to do. This is not a good thing for me to do. Similarly, in terms of seeking company, that, well, this is a good company to have, or this is not a good company to have. So I think that judgment we have to make. It's possible that sometimes a judgment might go wrong. It's okay if it goes wrong, and the moment we discover that, well, that was a wrong judgment, well, we can correct ourselves. So making a judgment doesn't mean that you're kind of stuck to it forever. Make a judgment, take a decision based on your best knowledge and experience at this moment. But at any given point, if you discover that that was not the best decision, or that there is a better way to do something or understand something, be willing to let go of your previous mistakes. Don't cling to something just because, well, I made a choice, so I have to cling to it. So that's important. The second thing to remember here is the company of the holy, it need not be restricted to only persons. Primarily, yes, holy people. But we can find the company of the holy even through books. What kind of books do we choose to read? In fact, one of our elderly monks used to say that we should read, as serious spiritual seekers, it would be good to restrict our reading to only books written by enlightened beings, enlightened people. Again, how do we know someone is enlightened? We have to use our best judgment. But just reading anything and everything out on the shelf, just because it is there, or you go to a bookstore, you say, oh, I just want to while away my time, and just pick up some book and read it. While we might get some ideas, it might be okay for a casual reader, but for a serious spiritual seeker, we will have to be careful about what kind of ideas I am allowing to get inside my head. And so being judicious about the kind of books that we read, the kind of movies that we see, the kind of television programs we watch, and of course the kind of company we live in, of our friends and others. If we are careful about all of these things, then we will discover at some point, among all the things we are associated with, people, books, and everything, our sources of entertainment, game, and so on, among all these things, at some point we will discover a glimpse of holiness. If we are able to feel somehow some kinds of company uplifting us, helping us go closer to our true self, then we can try to hold on to that. And that is what this sutra says. It's difficult to attain. But sooner or later, if we are looking for it, we'll find it. If we are not looking for it, we won't find it. Sometimes it may be there right in front of us, but we may not be able to recognize it. So we have to be looking for it. And if we are looking for it, it may be difficult, but sooner or later, we will discover it, often in a very unexpected ways. And that's why he says it's difficult, agamyaha. Even having got it, we may not understand it. So we will have to acquire that little bit of sensitivity within us to be able to recognize a holy person. In other words, what it means is there has to be these seeds of holiness within our own heart in order for us to then recognize that holiness outside. So a devotee will have to strive to develop those seeds of holiness in his or her own heart, and then it will become easier to find holy company outside. And then amogascha, once we are lucky to find that company in our lives, the effect that that company has on us is infallible. It'll definitely transform us. It cannot fail. So these are the three things. First, difficult to find. Once found, difficult to understand. And once we have found it and understood it to however little an extent, we will see that the effect or the transformative power of a genuine holy company is it may be inscrutable, but it is also infallible. Now, how do we get that kind of company? See in Sutra 40. Labhyatepi tat kripayaiva. So even getting this company, we will have to try to find that company. But once we find it, the devotee recognizes that this grace, this company that has come to me, has not come out of my own effort. That even once I find the company of a great soul, that also has come to me through the grace of God. The idea is, as a devotee, my little I has to completely get out of the way. And therefore, a devotee says, whatever, I have to make effort. I have to struggle to do these things. But once when I get them, for me then to recognize, oh, I worked so hard and that I got it, that is going to somehow hurt my devotion, because then my ego has gotten stronger. So a devotee struggles, but when that struggle is successful, and when I find what I was looking for, a devotee's mind says, This has come to me through God's grace. And that is what is said here. It is holy company can be obtained through His grace alone. Sutra 41. Tasmin tajjane bheda abhavat. Tasmin mean in God, and tajjane mean in God's devotees. There is no distinction. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that there is no discrimination or distinction between devotees. We know that in daily life, it is human nature to try to segregate ourselves. Desegregation, for instance, in this country became a big movement because of the segregation based on race or color of skin. But segregation can occur with many other factors. People form groups based on their nationality, their culture, their religion, their race, sometimes their profession, their interests, which is why we have these, we sometimes even call them special interest groups. So based on our interests, based on various factors, people form into groups. In themselves, forming a group is not bad in itself. Where the danger arises is that once I form a group, and then those who are within my group, I say, oh, these are my folks. And then those who are outside the group, I say, those are outsiders. Once these are mine and those are not mine, that kind of mentality is harmful. There is that one verse which is very beautiful, very ancient Sanskrit verse, which goes like this. Ayam nijaha paro va iti ganana laghu chaitasam udara charitanantu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. It simply means this, Ayam nijaha, oh, these are my people. Paro va, those are not my people, those are aliens. Dividing people in this ours and not ours, mine and not mine, this kind of mentality, laghu chetasam, laghu means small, chitta is mind. So small-minded people make this distinction between mine and not mine. But udara charitanantu, those whose hearts have become truly broad, who have truly, their hearts have opened to embrace everyone, vasudhaiva kutumba, the entire world becomes one family. So forming groups is great. It's like this, if I'm interested in, say, in certain subject, if I'm interested in astronomy, let's say. So it's not essentially bad for me to find other people who are interested in astronomy. We can get together and then share ideas because we have some commonality, we can learn things together. But then if I say, oh, these astronomers are only the good people in the world, non-astronomers are bad, and we should do something to monopolize over them or anything. So that kind of mentality is bad. And so what Ramakrishna said was, one of the characteristics of developing this love for God in our heart is that we will be able to look beyond these walls that we create, separating one person from another person. Because in every person's heart, we will see the same divine being. If I see myself as a child of God, then it will be easy for me to see everyone as children of God. And those children could be of different color. They could speak different language. They could come from different strata of society. There might be 100 things different from me. But yet, if I'm a child of God, they are children of God. And then we are all God's children. Once we've kind of developed that kind of an outlook, we will be more accepting. Sometimes we see that, and we all have had an experience, say in a family, and not just our own little family. If you have kind of an extended family, your uncles and aunties and cousins and nephews and nieces, and we kind of get together on some, okay, maybe on a Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving dinners can be fun, but they can also be sometimes, depending on what topic is being discussed, can be pretty noisy thing. And yet, there is some kind of a joy in that. Joy in that so long as I see that these are my people. Yes, some of them may be crazy, some of them may be, I totally disagree with some of them, and yet they are my own people. As long as this feeling lasts, that dinner is going to be fun. But once that feeling lost, then people can start fighting and it can become even worse. So similarly, when I say a devotee transcends all these distinctions, doesn't mean that devotee has to agree with everything that's happening. You can totally disagree with someone. And yet, the way I will express my disagreement will be different if I somehow see that they are my own. And that is what Holy Mother meant. And she said, "No one is a stranger, my child. The whole world is your own." Now that is the attitude of a devotee. If love for God enters into my heart, if I want to cultivate and develop that love for God, love for the spiritual ideal, then I must make a conscious effort to see the whole world as my own. With all its challenges, with all its ugliness, it's still my world. Now the challenge is this, and Narada will clarify in Sutra 43. What does it mean when all are my own? How do I deal with people who are my own, but yet people who are very difficult to deal with? In fact, just a few days ago, I received an email from a Vedanta student who asked me whether I had ever reflected on the topic dealing with difficult people. And I said, that is really a good topic to reflect on. That how do I deal with difficult people who, well, one way of dealing with it is to avoid them. But what if it's not possible to avoid them? So if you're going to bump into them every now and then, and yet they are difficult to deal with. So how do we deal with it? And so we find kind of hints at how to deal with such people in Narada's teachings. But we'll as we go forward, we'll have more occasions to discuss this. So what he points out here is that in God and in God's devotees, they don't create distinctions, though they don't create walls. And that is an important point to remember. And if I want to be a God's devotee, if I want to love God, then I must not build these walls around me as well. Sutra 42. Tadeva sadhyatam, tadeva sadhyatam. Attain that holy company alone without fail. And that is why this becomes then a primary practice in the path of Bhakti Yoga. Finding holy company. You can see all of the practices that Narada mentioned earlier, in one way or the other, they are practice of holy company. That doing things, only those things which will remind me or take me nearer to God. Or finding a way to do things in which God is somehow present. Relating ourselves to people around us through God. Trying to remember God in every little thing that we do. So, company of ideas, thoughts, words related to my spiritual ideal in some way, as often as possible throughout the day. if there is anything in my life in which, however remotely or indirectly, I cannot fit God into it, then probably that thing should not be a part of my life. And as I said, so long as what I'm doing is moral, it's ethical, it's good, it's right, it's always possible to fit God into it. At the very least, we can say that whatever situation I'm in today, God has put me in this situation. That is how a devotee sees. Whatever knowledge I have, whatever skills I have, whatever talent I have, it has come to me through God's grace. So let me do the best I can. I might think that I have chosen this career or I have made this choice, but a devotee realizes that I couldn't have chosen this if it were not God's will. Now, this God's will is a very tricky thing, and a devotee has to be careful about that. First of all, we don't always know what God's will is presently. So if we want to invoke God's will into our life, we will have to do it consistently. Otherwise, better not to speak about God's will. Because otherwise what happens is, occasionally when it's not very convenient for me to find any other explanation, then I can always fall back and say, well, it's God's will. It doesn't work that way. If I'm going to invoke God's will, although I don't have to keep on saying it aloud, deep in the back of my mind, I should recognize that everything that happens in my life, not just the big things, not just the things that I mess up and I say, well, it's God's will, but every little thing happens because of God's will. Every breath I take happens because of God's will. If I'm not able to remember it always, it's so much better to then recognize, well, it's my will. And pray to God that please guide my will. Take my will in the right direction. Make my will as close to your will as possible. I have plans for my life, and God also has plans for my life. And a devotee knows God's plan will finally be what work. My plan, to the extent my plan is similar to God's plan, it will work. Otherwise, it won't. So a prayer would be, God, I make a lot of plans. Please help me make plans which are as close to your plans which are already there. Unfortunately, God doesn't always show us his or her blueprint. So if we already had a printout of all of the plan God has for us, we wouldn't have had to plan anything. But then life won't be fun. So we have to make our plans and seek God's blessings on it. And be ready to revise our plans as and when needed, because such revision may be necessary. And that is why he says, attain that holy company alone without fail. All of the spiritual practices in the path of devotion are a way of finding the right company, holding on to it, and benefiting from it. That company can be of people, ideas, books, songs, music, anything that I associate with in my life. If I can try to find God's presence in it, my life will be truly blessed. Verse 43. Dussangaha sarvathaiva tyajyaha. The company of the unholy should be avoided by all means. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Now, this is a challenge. If I'm going to see everyone as my own, not all of those people are going to be holy. Some will be unholy. And here Narada says it should be avoided by all means. Now, if it's possible to avoid it physically, by all means, of course. If there is something or someone who is taking me away from God, and if it's possible for me to avoid that thing or place or person, I should do it. In life, it may not always be possible. So we need to find other ways of protecting ourselves. So can we avoid something mentally, if not physically? Now, avoiding something doesn't mean they are not my own. Well, they are my own, but yet the best way I can deal with these people or things which are my own is by keeping away from them. Ramakrishna used to say that God is present even in lions and tigers. So if you go to a national park where there are wild animals, or you go to some place where there are wild animals, and what do? In fact, a few weeks ago, when we discussed the story of Ramakrishna about a mad elephant going down the middle of the street, well, there is God present in that elephant. So what do? Do we just go and stand in the middle and say, well, Lord, come? No, we have to avoid a mad elephant chasing down a street and protect ourselves. That doesn't mean God is not present in that crazy elephant. It only means that the best way of dealing that God who is dwelling in that crazy, intoxicated elephant, the best way of dealing with that God is to get out of the way. And so that is what Narada is pointing out here. So here is one important thing. Seeing God in all is a great teaching, but it's also a teaching that may not help us right away. We have to somehow become qualified. We have to be ready to put that teaching into practice. So intellectually, it's good to have an idea there is Brahman present in everyone is divine. That's great. But in the beginning, as long as the seeds of good and bad, good and evil in my own heart, as long as my mind continues to make this distinction between what is right and what is not right, it is my duty to hold on to what is right. It is my duty to keep away from everything that's wrong. If and when I succeed in doing what is right, doing what is good, avoiding or completely eliminating the evil and bad from my own heart, and recognize the ability to do this also comes through God's grace, not out of puffed up my ego and say, I have done it, then the whole thing fails. So once I'm able to do what is right and what is good and remain humble, recognize that it's God's grace that made it possible, it's then that it becomes natural for me to see the presence of God in everyone. But until that time, it's still an intellectual thing. And it's good to have that intellectual idea, the theory that yes, God is present in all. Because otherwise, if I'm not prepared to understand the teaching in its complete depth, it might make me take wrong steps. For instance, if some company is bad for me, if it's likely to take me in a wrong path, and I don't make that distinction. I say, well, there is God present in it, and so let me accept this thing because God is present in it. Then all the distinction between good and bad, good and evil goes away. So this is the tricky thing. Good and evil are different. Good and we have to. Everything is not good. As long as there is an idea of good, there is something which is not good. And I have to do what is good and eliminate that which is not good. Once I'm established in that goodness, once I'm able to truly become established in that what is right and what is good, it's then that I become capable of understanding the inner meaning of everything is divine. Then I can see the divine in all and yet not get affected by it and not get derailed by it. Because before we are ready to understand that, to merely just say, oh, everything is divine, and not use that power of discernment of what is right for me and what is not right for me, that can be very harmful for a devotee. And that is what Narada is warning us here, that the company of the unholy should be avoided by all means. And then in the next sutra, he will give a reason of why that should be avoided. We'll take that up next week. Yeah. Any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions? Yeah.
Swami, you were mentioning that it's not often very easy to identify holy people. Sometimes it appears as though that certain holy men, they have a very strong presence. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a metric to measure their holiness or not.
Yes. You see, in order to feel the presence of a holy person, there has to be some sensitivity within us as well. If we have, people speak about aura. I don't want to kind of make it kind of very esoteric. But yes, it is true that when we are in the company of some people, we automatically feel a sense of upliftment or calmness or peaceful. That's true. But not everyone feels it. We need to have a receptivity in order to feel it. For instance, even in the times of Sri Ramakrishna, not everyone recognized him to be an incarnation during his time. In fact, a lot of temple employees who were working in Dakshineshwar, some of them just saw him as just a crazy person. Some of them saw him like, oh, good person, a good devotee. And some others saw, oh, he is extraordinary. So the person was same, but different people, they judged him differently because the different people had different powers of receptivity. So yes, you are right that people who are advanced in spiritual life do have that presence, and those who have that power of recognizing it are able to recognize it. Yes, sure.
And so if somebody becomes really advanced, then you can find the God in every, even inanimate objects also, right?
Yes. In fact, that's many of the texts speak about sarvatra samadarshanaha. You see the same divine being everywhere. So Brahma darshan, you see the presence of Brahman everywhere. That's true. And that's the goal, that's the ideal towards which we are moving.
Thank you.
Swamiji, it seems to me that we are I'm victim of God's play. Because if we are all one, God is so powerful, God can change me anytime. if I'm a victim of God's play, then why should I worship that God, or why should I look for that God?
No, I'm not a victim of God's play.
Then if theoretically I understand who is God, how a God should be, then why couldn't I be like that?
Well, we speak God's play, that the word is called Leela. Now that framework of Leela, God's play, is really, it's the imagery provided in that is of a little child who goes onto the beach and makes all sand castles. And then after some time, the child is bored and the child kind of destroys them. So that's why we say God is like a little child who builds and destroys, like a child's play. And that's how the word idea of play or Leela comes in. But in that imagery, the child is all alone on that whole beach. There aren't other people. In other words, if it's God's play, God is not playing with us. I mean, who are we? And in fact, that is exactly what, I'm very happy you brought that up, because this, in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, this is exactly what one devotee mentioned to Ramakrishna. That, God is playing all this, playing with all of us, and we are getting crushed here. It's all God's play. And then Sri Ramakrishna looked at him and said, but who are you? I am that God who has forgotten. So I'm really my own victim. It's not that, God and God has made it. That's a very dualistic way, which is not what Narada is referring to. That God has made us and kind of thrown us here and we are suffering, and God can help us, but He doesn't. That's not how it is. Think about it this way. When we go to sleep, and I had a very terrible dream, in which I see myself in a dream suffering, and I can say, why is this person playing with me? Why am I suffering? I'm not responsible for this suffering. Well, who is responsible for that suffering? The one who is dreaming. So I'm the one who fell asleep, and that suffering has resulted. And so therefore, I am not God's victim. I am my own victim, according to Vedanta. The false me is a victim of the real me who has forgotten the reality. That's the idea. Yeah.
Swamiji, I'm not sure if I'll be able to frame the question, but in my own journey of learning things, I find that whatever I read from spiritual text, I mean, we probably won't be having a monastic life or religious life. I mean, we're worldly people. So it's hard to take those messages and practice, but we always find a pattern. Yeah. So in this learning that we get from now about finding a spiritual partner and all, it's like damned if we do or damned if we don't. And I have to find it, but I don't know if I'll find it. Even if I find it, I don't know. The pattern is damned if I do, damned if I don't. And we find that in our real life situations as well. So what is the purpose of that? Do we just toss a coin and choose one and do it? Or is it that I'm not getting the message about the damned if I do or damned if I don't situation as such?
But it's not just about holy company, but we are doing it with every little thing. I mean, decide to go to school. Yeah. Should I go to this school or that school? When you want to decide what courses to take in school, should I take this? What kind of career I should choose?
For here is like coming down here. If I come here, then the family gets upset. But do I make them upset or don't? Or do I still come here?
So we are actually in daily life, from morning to evening, we are continually making choices. Yeah. And we don't always know the outcome. But we use our best judgment to say, I feel this is the right thing to do, right? So similarly, even while seeking holy company, we have to use our best judgment. And as I said, there is no guarantee that every time we'll get it right. But that's life. Life, we can mature more, we can learn more, so long as we learn from every mistake we make. So even if I make a wrong judgment, and I later on realize, in retrospect, that was a bad choice. Okay, but I've learned something. So in future now, I'm a little bit wiser by that mistake I made. Now, going forward, if I make exactly a same mistake again, that means I have not learned anything. But if I'm careful not to do that mistake, I have become a little wiser. So we should find a way to learn from the things that we get right and also the things that we get wrong. Because both, we can learn from both. And that's why one of my peeves is that all these, in science, all these research work which gets published in journals or scientific papers, they only publish the things that work. And only that gets recognized. But I think it would be helpful to someone to say, well, this experiment was done and it failed, totally failed. And I think that knowledge that that experiment doesn't work is as valuable, perhaps more valuable than another experiment which tell it works. But because that's not recognized in the kind of system in which we are, it's possible that maybe 10 different laboratories in 10 different parts of the world are doing that same experiment, which I know doesn't work, but which doesn't get publication. So a lot of resources are actually getting wasted that way. But that's the system in which we are, that success gets rewarded, but failure is looked down upon. And therefore failure doesn't find, there is no way to publicize one's failure without somehow not benefiting from it. And so people try to hide their failures or not publicize them because it doesn't help. That's the thing.
Swamiji, this, attachment to things, people, objects, or whatnot, how does that really begin?
Well, we'll come to that in the next sutra, maybe next week if you're here. And very quickly, it just begins this way. Actually, there is 2 verses in the Gita in the 2nd chapter, which gives this entire mechanism of how that happens. That first, our senses come in contact with objects. And once the senses come in contact with objects, I react to it. And that reaction could be favorable or not favorable. And if the reaction is favorable, then I want it. If it's unfavorable, I want to run away from it. And then if I want it, and if there is any obstruction to wanting it, then I get angry about it, or I get hurt about it. So all these things that occur, it starts with the senses coming in contact with objects. And that's how then we get attached to them. Attachment is not simply in sense of liking it. Even through we can be attached to something with total dislike either also. So we can get attached to, I can get attached to a thing that I totally hate. My hatred will attach me to that thing. And so all of our lives, we are continually reacting to everything that is presented to us through sight, smell, taste, and so on. And that reaction is either favorable or unfavorable. And that is why one of the important spiritual practices is samadarshana. That's what the Gita emphasizes again and again. In victory and defeat, in joy and sorrow, can I just keep my balance? So the less I get affected by what's happening outside of me, the less attachment will come. And the less attachment there is in my life, the less pain and sorrow that I will experience. And so that's the kind of a connection.
Right, like for example, if there is an object, for example, let's say there is a BMW car, and I look at it, and he will also look at it, but I get attached to that, but he is very oblivious to that. What is that in me? It's not in the object, but it's in me.
Of course it's in you. So we already have these mental impressions in our heart called samskaras. So when I see a BMW, and if there is already a samskara, a mental impression in my heart, at some point like, I wish I had a better car. I wish I had a BMW. So as soon as I see something like that, that samskara gets activated and produces a desire to either want it. Things like that. So it's none of us we don't begin our lives with a clean slate. We already come with pre-existing, just like pre-existing condition in healthcare. So we already have pre-existing samskaras when we are born. So that's the reality. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to comment that, if you look at history, the same kinds of problems that were there 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, are the same problems that we're having right now. And it doesn't look like human beings learn. You were saying that it'd be nice, you make a mistake, you learn from it, and then you move on. It just doesn't happen.
You're right. Well, that's the tragedy.
And it's like, so human beings, no matter how much their IQ must be, but they're foolish. And maybe a few of us who, start doing spiritual practices, you start learning a little bit. But again, there's a huge amount of foolishness that goes on.
The Gita says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhai. Among thousands of people, I think that the Gita is also being a little generous. Probably it's millions of people. Among millions, perhaps a few may strive, perhaps a few might notice this craziness and kind of want to get out of it. It's like, this is crazy. I don't want any of it. So among millions, only a few feel like that. And among these few who feel, perchance one or two might become free. So the statistics are not that encouraging. What a spiritual seeker will do is to say, I'm going to be that rare person who is going to be free. And this doesn't seem as audacious as it might look. Because when we buy a lottery ticket, well, what is the probability that you're going to win millions? And yet we do it. All these lotteries, they're such a successful franchise because every one of us feels, I might win. So if I'm able to have that hope that I might win a lottery by buying a ticket, a spiritual seeker can have that hope. Sure, among the millions who might strive for enlightenment, perhaps a few or one or two might get enlightened. I'm going to be that rare person who will be enlightened. So there has to be a little bit of that, I don't know what you call that mentality of a chronic lottery buyer, a person who buys lottery tickets. That kind of a hope that I will be that rare person who will win millions. A spiritual seeker can say, I will be that rare being who recognize I am Brahman. I don't want to be born again. I don't want to go on moving into this unending cycle of birth and death and keep on suffering endlessly. I just want to be free, and I'm going to do it in this life itself. One who has that attitude, that faith in oneself, there is a greater chance that such a person will become free. But if we feel, oh no, if not in this life, maybe next life, or otherwise, then the chances are less. It's a little bit like marathon. If you're running for a marathon, you've got to say, I'm going to finish these 26 miles. You can't say, oh, I'll just try for a mile or two, and it doesn't work, then I'll just stop by in some Burger King on the way, and it's never going to happen then. So that's very important. For success in spiritual life, we cannot begin with the idea, oh, well, let me give it a shot. If it works, it works. That's not a very hopeful way to do it. For a spiritual seeker, when you sit for your japa or meditation daily, don't sit with the idea, oh, let me just finish this today for 10 minutes and then get back to work. No, that's not how it works. Every time you sit for japa or meditation, sit with that hope, that faith. Who knows? Today when I sit and I try to think of God, I try to think of my chosen deity, my chosen deity will appear before me. Maybe I might get enlightened today. I don't have to go to work afterwards. So don't plan for your work. When you're sitting for meditation, even if you sit for 10 minutes, I'm not saying you sit for hours and hours. Even if you sit for just 10 minutes, those 10 minutes should be the most important time in your life. In those 10 minutes, don't think that, oh, these 10 minutes, nothing is going to happen. God's grace, as Narada will also say again and again, God's grace can come any moment. And if we are not ready for it, we won't even know it's come. So whatever time you spend in your daily prayer and meditation, sit always with that hope. That today, I'm going to be vigilant. I'm going to give my whole mind to God. And just wait for God's grace. When that happens, day after day after day, one day suddenly that grace will come. But there always has to be this hope. And hope comes through faith. That is why these three primary virtues, and even St. Paul refers to it in the New Testament, speaks about faith, hope, and love. And that's why faith, Shraddha, that's the beginning. So whatever you do in life, and especially in spiritual life, that faith in your teacher, faith in your practice, with that faith, if you have that faith fully charged up, you will have hope. Because then your spiritual practice will become more meaningful with that faith. It will develop that hope in your heart. And when that hope is there, experiences will come. Presence of God will be felt. And then true love will enter into heart. So all these three are connected. Faith, hope, and love. So we can feel hopeless about the situation of the world, and that's fine. But never feel hopeless about your spiritual life itself. So there are things it's good to feel hopeless about, but for a spiritual seeker, never lose that hope of realizing God in this life. And that will be possible the moment we kind of protect that faith in the heart. So we'll have more opportunities to talk about it in future. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So next Wednesday we will continue. Next Wednesday will be the last class for Narada Bhakti Sutra before we close for the winter recess. And then we will meet in February. So we will try to continue the discussion next week. On Sunday, we will have Antar Yoga as usual. 2 of our members will do readings from spiritual texts in addition to music and reflection and meditation. And then we'll also celebrate the birthdays of all born in the month of December. That will be on Sunday. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.